Welcome back, everyone. Today we are going to be diving deep into a topic that's pretty important for global healthcare, and that's the market for arterial stents.
It's a fascinating area, and
Yeah.
yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, before we really jump in, I do want to mention that our main source for today is this really in-depth market report that you were kind enough to share with me, and it really lays out the kind of current state and the future projections for this market through 2033.
Yeah, it's a great resource. Gives a very comprehensive overview.
It really does, and I think for anyone listening who might not be super familiar with what an arterial stent actually is, maybe we could just take a quick second to clarify that.
Yeah, sure. An arterial stent, you can think of it basically like a little tiny mesh tube,
Hmm.
almost like a scaffold, and it's inserted into an artery that's become narrowed or blocked.
Okay, so it's like helping to prop open that artery.
Exactly. Yeah, and helps keep that artery open so that blood can flow freely again. And it's, vital for treating things like heart disease and also peripheral artery disease, or PAD, which affects the blood flow in the limbs.
Got it. So really, really important devices with pretty significant implications for health and obviously for the healthcare market as a whole.
Absolutely.
And so I guess our mission today is to kind of go through this report, look at some of the key findings, look at the numbers, try to understand what's driving this market, what the experts are predicting. And I think, by the time we're done, you should have a much clearer picture of this whole sector.
Sounds good.
So to kick things off, the report estimates that the global market size for these arterial stents is going to be somewhere around 800 and 562.9 million US dollars in 2025, which is just it's a huge number.
Yeah, that's a significant figure for sure.
And what's even more interesting is that it's not staying static, right? It's projected to grow even further to reach, hang on, let me get this right, one arrow, $847.22553 million by 2033. With a compound annual growth rate, a CAGR of 3% from 2025 to 2033. And that's pretty significant growth.
It is, and it really highlights the increasing need for these devices.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's not a trend we want to see in terms of the underlying health conditions,
Yeah.
but definitely is a trend that's happening globally.
Yeah, and the report points to the rising prevalence of cardiovascular diseases worldwide as a major factor driving this growth. So it makes sense. Sadly, but it makes sense. So let's break it down geographically a little bit. Where are we seeing the biggest markets for arterial stents?
Well, right now, North America has the lion's share.
Okay, so they are the dominant player.
Yeah, in 2025, North America is projected to account for more than 40% of the global market, with a total market size of 368.27 million US dollars.
Okay, so a huge chunk of that overall market. And is that expected to continue?
Well, the growth rate is a little more moderate in North America. They're predicting a CAGR of 1.5% between 2025 and 2033.
Okay, so still growth, but maybe not as rapid as some other areas.
Exactly.
And if we zoom in on North America even further, within that region, the U.S. market alone is estimated at almost 2,500 million in 2025,
Yes.
with a CAGR of 1.3%. Canada is projected to reach 380.19 million with a slightly higher CGR of 2.3%, and Mexico is estimated at 288.31 million with a 2% CAGR.
That's right.
So a little bit of variation even within North America.
Yep.
Now, what about Europe?
Europe is the second largest market. It's projected to hold over 30% of the global market share.
Wow, so still a major player.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the report cites a market size of 136.48 million US dollars for Europe in 2025.
Whoa. Okay, that seems like a pretty big number, especially compared to the global estimate.
Yeah, it is. It
Yeah.
is. And I was looking at that, and I think there might be a little bit of a discrepancy in the data there, but nonetheless,
Even if that number is a little high, it's clearly still a significant market.
definitely.
What's the projected growth rate for Europe?
A CAGR of 2.1% from 2025 to 2033.
So continued expansion, just not maybe at the same pace as some other regions.
Right.
And within Europe, are there any particular countries that stand out?
Yeah, the UK is estimated at 417.18 million US dollars with a CAGR of 2.9%, and then Germany at 491.68 million with a 2.3% CGR.
Okay.
France a little bit lower at 228.46 million with a CAGR of 1.3%.
Yeah.
Italy at 213.56 million with 1.5%, and Spain at 203.63 million with a CAGR of 1.2%.
Okay.
And then Russia is also listed at 384.9 billion with a CAGR of 1.1%.
Got it. So we are seeing some variation there across different European economies.
Yes.
Now, when we shift our focus to the Asia-Pacific region, that's where the report suggests things are really going to take off.
Oh, absolutely. APAC is going to be the real growth story in the coming years. They're estimated to hold about 23% of the global market share in 2025, with a market size of 2055.1 US dollars. But the growth rate is what's really remarkable, and the CAGR of 5.6% from 2025 to 2033.
Wow, that's a huge jump compared to what we were seeing in North America and Europe.
It really is, and it shows how much the global market is going to change in the coming years. This isn't just about numbers either. It's about how healthcare is becoming more accessible and how economies are developing in these regions, so more people are going to be able to benefit from these advanced technologies like stents. I mean, think about things like increasing urbanization and the adoption of Western diets in some of these countries. It's sadly contributing to cardiovascular disease, but it also creates a larger market for these types of solutions.
Yeah, it's a complex interplay of factors for sure.
Definitely.
So within APAC, which specific countries are driving this growth?
Well, India is one to watch. They're projected to have a KGR of 7.5%, which is just incredible, with a 2025 market size of 205 or 5.51 million US dollars.
Okay.
Southeast Asia as a whole is looking at a 6.4% CAGR with a market size of $135.64 million. Singapore is also noteworthy with a CAGR of 5.9% and a market of $41.11 million. And then, of course, there's China, which is a huge economic force, and they're estimated to reach $863.14 million in 2025 with a very strong CAGR of 5.1%.
So lots of activity and lots of growth potential there in APAC.
Yes, very much so.
Okay, let's talk about some of the other regions. What about South America?
South America is projected to account for a little over 5% of the global market share, with a size of 325.39 million US dollars in 2025 and a CAGR of 3.7% from 2025 to 2033. Brazil is a key player in this region with a projected market size of $139.27 million and a CAGR of 4.3%.
Okay.
And it's interesting to see how this growth often goes hand in hand with improvements in healthcare systems and people becoming more aware of the treatments that are available to them.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what about the Middle East and Africa?
The Middle East is estimated to have around 2% of the global market with a size of 342.52 million US dollars in 2025 and a CAGR of 4.2%. Saudi Arabia is a major market there with a projected size of $120.57 million and a TGR of 4.5%. And Africa, although it currently only has about 1% of the global share with a market size of $188.38 million in 2025, it's expected to grow at a CAGR of 3.3%, with South Africa being a significant market at $66.31 million and a CAGR of 4.2%.
Okay, so promising growth potential in those regions as well, even though their current market share is smaller.
Absolutely.
So we've got a good sense of the overall market and how it's spread out geographically. Now let's talk a bit more about the actual products themselves. What are the main types of arterial stents?
So the report breaks it down into two main categories, coronary stents and peripheral stents. And within coronary stents, you've got further subdivisions like bare metal stents, drug-eluting stents, also known as DES, and bioresorbable stents. Peripheral stents are usually classified as either self-expandable or balloon expandable.
Okay, lots of different options there. Are any of those categories growing particularly quickly?
Yeah, the coronary stents segment is the fastest growing, which makes sense considering how prevalent coronary artery disease is globally. CAD affects the blood vessels that supply the heart, and that's a major health concern worldwide.
Right, so it aligns with those overall market drivers we talked about earlier.
Exactly.
Now, just for our listeners who might not be totally familiar with the difference between coronary and peripheral stents, can you give us a quick explanation?
Of course. So coronary stents, as the name implies, are designed specifically for use in the coronary arteries. Those are the blood vessels that carry oxygen-rich blood to the heart muscle. Peripheral stents, on the other hand, are used in arteries that are located elsewhere in the body, most commonly in the legs, to treat peripheral artery disease, or PE. So it all comes down to where in the body those stents are being used.
Gotcha. Now, the report also mentions some pretty significant advancements when it comes to coronary stents, specifically these drug-eluting stents, or DES, and bioresorbable stents.
Yeah, these are really game changers.
Can you tell us a bit more about those?
So one of the big challenges with stenting is something called restenosis, which is basically when the artery narrows again after the initial procedure. Drug-eluting stents are coated with a medication that helps to prevent this re-narrowing. So that's pretty cool. Bioresorbable stents take it a step further. They're designed to hold the artery open while it heals. and then they gradually dissolve over time. So you don't have that permanent metal implant in there. It's a really amazing technology, and it's led to some much better outcomes for patients.
That's so interesting. So it's not just about keeping the artery open, it's about how to do that in the safest and most effective way possible.
Exactly.
Now, when we think about where in the body these stents are actually being used, the applications, what are some of the main areas that the report highlights?
Well, the main ones are the coronary artery, the carotid artery, that's the one in the neck that supplies blood to the brain, the iliac artery in the pelvic region, and then the femoral and popliteal arteries, those are in the legs.
Okay. And is there a particular application that stands out as being the most common?
Yeah, coronary artery applications are definitely the biggest segment of the market. Again, that's tied to the high incidence of coronary artery disease.
Right.
But something else to keep in mind is that carotid artery stenting is being used more and more as a less invasive option for patients who are at high risk of stroke. So stent technology is being used to treat a variety of vascular conditions, not just heart-related issues.
It's amazing how this technology is being applied in so many different ways.
It really is.
Okay, so we've talked about the market size, the regional breakdown, the different types of stents and where they're used. Let's dive into what's actually driving this market growth. The report lists a whole bunch of factors.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
What are some of the main drivers?
One big one is government support. There are a lot of government initiatives and funding for cardiovascular health programs around the world, which is great.
That makes sense.
And overall, healthcare expenditure is increasing globally, which means more people have access to these kinds of sophisticated medical devices and procedures. And in many regions, reimbursement policies are becoming more favorable, which makes these procedures more financially accessible to patients.
Yeah, that's really important because if the cost is prohibitive, it doesn't matter how amazing the technology is if people can't afford it.
Absolutely.
What other factors are contributing to this growth?
Well, there's a growing preference for minimally invasive procedures,
Okay.
both among patients and physicians. I mean, these procedures usually mean shorter hospital stays, faster recovery, times less scarring compared to open surgery,
Makes sense. Less invasive is usually a good thing all around.
usually.
And we've got an aging global population, which unfortunately means more people are susceptible to cardiovascular conditions.
Right.
But then we also have the expansion of healthcare infrastructure in developing countries, particularly in places like South America.
Yeah, and that's giving more people access to these advanced treatments.
And we're seeing the rise of new technologies like those biodegradable stents, which you mentioned earlier. The report specifically mentioned India as a place where that's really taking off.
Yeah.
And then there are things like the rising prevalence of obesity, which the report highlighted as a contributing factor in the UK.
Yes,
It's fascinating to see how these different regional factors all play a role.
definitely. Each region has its own unique dynamics.
The report also mentioned increasing investments in research and development, particularly in Germany. How does that impact the market?
Those investments are crucial. That's what leads to the development of new and better stents. Things like next-generation drug-eluting stents that are even safer and more effective, and advancements in bioresorbable materials. All that innovation leads to better outcomes for patients, and it also expands the potential applications of these stents.
So it's a cycle of innovation driving growth, driving more innovation.
Exactly.
Now, are there any challenges or roadblocks that the market is facing?
Oh, there are definitely challenges.
What are some of the main ones?
Well, there are always risks with any implantable medical device. Things like stent thrombosis, which is when a blood clot forms within the stent, and restenosis. Even though the newer stents are designed to minimize that risk, it can still happen. And these potential complications can sometimes lead to doctors choosing other treatment options if they're available.
Right, so it's not a perfect solution.
Nothing is.
And there are also financial barriers.
Yes, unfortunately, in many developing countries, limited healthcare budgets and reimbursement policies make these procedures less accessible.
So even if the technology is there, the economics don't always work out.
Right. And that's a major barrier that needs to be addressed.
Okay, so we've talked about the drivers and the restraints. What about broader trends? We've already touched on the preference for minimally invasive procedures and the impact of the aging population. Are there any other major trends shaping the market?
Well, the focus on technological innovation is huge. We're seeing constant advancements in drug-eluting stents, research into better ways to deliver those drugs, and the development of even more sophisticated bioresorbable stents.
Yeah. And I imagine those trends are going to continue.
Oh, I think so. It's a very dynamic field.
Now, the market report also gives us some insight into who the major players are in this industry. Who are the companies that are really leading the way?
Well, it's a competitive market, but some of the biggest names are Medtronic, Abbott Laboratories, Boston Scientific Corporation, Terumo Corporation, and B. Braun Melsung and AG.
Those are some big names in the medical device world.
Yes, they are. They've all got extensive product portfolios, strong research and development capabilities, and well-established global distribution networks.
So how do they stay ahead of the game? What are their strategies for maintaining that competitive edge?
It all comes down to innovation. They're investing heavily in research and development to create the next generation of stents. Drug-eluting stents with better safety profiles, bioresorbable stents that perform even better and last longer, and new materials that can be used in stent design.
And we're actually seeing some of those innovations coming to market. The report mentioned FDA approval for Medtronic's Onyx Frontier DES in May 2022.
That's right. And there was also positive clinical trial data for Boston Scientific's Illuvia stent for P80 back in October 2021.
So things are moving quickly.
Very quickly.
So to wrap things up, what would you say are the most important takeaways for our listeners about the global arterial stent market?
Well, first, it's a big market, like really big.
Billions of dollars.
Yeah, and it's only going to get bigger. That growth is being driven by the unfortunate reality of increasing cardiovascular disease worldwide.
And the market is shifting. North America and Europe are still the dominant players for now, but the Asia-Pacific region is going to see the most rapid growth in the next few years.
Exactly.
And then, of course, there's the constant innovation, drug-eluting stents, bioresorbable stents. It's amazing to see how those advancements are improving outcomes for patients.
Definitely. It's a really exciting field to be following.
Absolutely. So for you, our listener, as you think about those regional differences and the incredible pace of technological change, what do you think the next big breakthrough might be? Or what about an underserved market that might emerge in the world of arterial stents? Think about how healthcare access, economic development, and medical innovation are all intertwined. It's a lot to ponder. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.